Now we'll look at Brave Warrior. Now, Brave Warrior is a standing balancing posture, and if you have difficulty with balance, you can use a wall to do this position. Now, if you're going to use the wall, you gauge your distance from. The real story of spirituality and the reason why we need to grow psychologically and spiritually, or the reason that we need to initiate the process in spiritual development, comes from the fall from Eden in the Bible. I think that story explains things clearer than anything else. Now, in the fall from the Eden in the Bible, God says to Adam and Eve, "You can't eat from these trees, you can eat from these trees." Now, it's the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil that you can't eat from. But the tree of life, you can eat from. Now, as long as they draw from this tree of life, they're in the Garden of Eden, the realms of paradise. And what did it take to fall from Eden? It was one bite of an apple from one of these trees. There was no, let's talk about this, I'll give you a second chance, let's take a time out. It was dismissed. So the tolerance of leaving Eden is zero. There's no room for error. But what the story sets up is the beginnings of what they called the original sin. Sin is an archery term. It means missing the mark, and it comes from the Latin sine, meaning without. So what the fall from Eden tells us is that we incarnate now with this thing called the original sin, which means that we draw from duality, fear and limitation. Our bodies come in with a pattern, and we look for food, we look for mother, we look for approval. Now, as long as we draw from duality, fear and limitation, there's nothing intrinsically evil with it, but it will keep your mind small, and your feelings will be reduced to insatiable cravings. You're going to have your back to this really important resource, and you will be having problems. Now, all we had to be taught was how to separate from these trees, the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil, duality, fear and limitation, and reconnect to this tree of life, to truth and wholeness. And when we do that, it's the fairy tale concept of living happily ever after. It's the return to Eden in the Bible. Now, basically, what you have to understand here is that none of this is magic, but all of it is physics. And I think with the discoveries of quantum physics, which I personally believe they have proved mysticism, what quantum physics tells us is that underlying matter is energy, and underlying energy is the void. So two of these dimensions of reality are dualistic. They're verifiable through the senses. We can recognize them. One of them is unrecognizable, which is the Trinity, the three-dimensional reality system that most religions use as the underpinning their knowledge base. And so all we have to do is learn to separate from duality, fear and limitation, and reconnect to this concept of wholeness. And basically, in order to do that, you do have to understand the physics of spirituality. Because like attracts like. Our physical bodies are like carbon steel, and the outside world is like a magnet, so the pull is very strong to the outside world. Now, what we basically are going to have to do is we're going to have to refine ourselves. We're going to have to change that carbon steel into a non-magnetic stainless steel. So it is the rituals, the ceremonies, the ordeals, the ascetic practices that help us refine the physical body, purify the body, cleanse the body of its dependency upon this outside world, so it enables us to reconnect it or invoke this new symbol for validation. All right, so the body comes in and it's got a pattern. It looks for food, it looks for mother, it looks for approval. And as long as we draw from the outside world, there's nothing intrinsically evil with it, but it keeps our minds small and our feelings will be reduced to insatiable cravings. You've got your back to this really important resource and you're having problems. So the problems manifest themselves, interestingly enough, as symptoms of guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, and boredom. But it's really a kickback from your unlived latent potential that you want to be whole and you want to be complete. But the only way that you can become complete is by separating from this and reconnecting to this. And that's what initiation in Kriya Yoga really is. It is the separation from duality and the reconnection with this concept of spirit, wholeness. But it's not just academic or intellectual. That was the thing that I found, was that in most of the spiritual communities today, everybody's substituting this intellectual devotional mirage for true spiritual reality. Then you go into the yoga community and everybody's doing postures so that they can look younger or live longer, which makes the body the goal in the formula. So it's not one or the other, but you really need both. You've got to train the mind to look for this concept of spirit, and then you've got to train the body to receive the image to validate the fears coming from your body. And when we do that, matter and mind come together with new information, which will impregnate the seed of your mind, and then your mind begins to open. Now, the formula that we work with in yoga is how we think is what we become. So initially, the conscious mind is about the size of a quarter, and your reality is the size of the state that you're in. And from this perspective, we feel like victims. Everything is happening to us. Now, when we separate from fear and limitation and we reconnect to truth and wholeness, matter and mind come together with new information. That dynamic is what impregnates the seed of your mind, and then your mind begins to open. Because when your mind is small, you feel like a victim. Everything is happening to you. When your mind opens, you now align yourself with the creator of your reality. Kriya Yoga is a lifestyle that enables us to actualize this experience, because it isn't magic. It's all basic physics.
Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadiya Purnameva Vashishate